Ladies and gentlemen, we finally have a new Bob McKenzie draft rankings. The last one we got was all the way back in the NHL preseason where a player like Ivan Ryabkin was still in the top 5 somehow, so a lot has changed. But looking at this new midseason ranking, who are the biggest surprises and which prospects have risen and fallen the most? Well, make sure you watch till the end as we go through this complete draft ranking and hit that subscribe button if you're new for more hockey prospect talk just like this all throughout the year. Now, of course, they always tease us about the Bob McKenzie rankings the day beforehand with the full 80 player reveal, a pretty hefty list. And if you guys don't know about Bob McKenzie's rankings already, they're not his rankings specifically. He goes and surveys different NHL scouts. Basically, this is a conglomerate of different NHL teams and scouts and what their opinions are on the draft right now. Now, getting right into the good stuff here with the rankings here, we get a little bit of a spoiler at the top of things. So the headline saying, Matthew Schaefer, a unanimous #1 in Bob McKenzie's midseason draft ranking. Now, this isn't necessarily surprising. We just saw elite prospects as well, putting Matthew Schaefer first on their board, and he's right up there for me. He's not #1, but right behind James Hagens at #2. I could easily see why you'd have him as your best prospect, and it seems to be unanimously #1, which is a little bit more surprising, especially with how much debate there's been about the first overall pick this year. Schaefer seems to be running away with it now. Now, the start of this article goes through Matthew Schaefer and why he's become the unanimous #1 in Bob McKenzie's rankings. The start of it saying, even though Matthew Schaefer broke his collarbone while playing for Team Canada and won't play another game until April, if at all this season, he cruised in the #1 spot in the mid-season rankings, and it wasn't particularly close either. Bob goes on to say that he was the unanimous #1 selection in the survey of 10 NHL club team scouts. As far as I'm concerned, one NHL head scout said, Schaefer is #1 and he's staying there, even if he never plays another game this season. And, as Bob says, it was a common refrain. Now, this part right here is what I find fascinating. Not only did Schaefer garner all 10 first place votes, 7 of the 10 scouts declared there is a substantial gap between the Ontario native and the rest of the 2025 draft class. 2 others described the gap as moderate, and 1 said it was only minuscule. Now, this is pretty different from what I've been hearing pretty much this entire year. Even with some of the biggest Matthew Schaefer fans I've been seeing out there, a lot of them would still say that players like Misa, players like Hagens, and even Martone are right up there as still competitors and still guys that are worthy of great high-quality picks. And especially in Schaefer's case, I think this is about the most praise we've seen him get up to this point. Another scout said, I suppose it's possible Schaefer not playing and those other guys playing could close the gap. And who knows, maybe on draft day, someone other than Schaefer will go #1, but I don't think so. He's in a class all by himself. Now, I think this is for a multitude of reasons. Now, the biggest reason why Schaefer's getting this much attention is just because he's awesome in the first place, one of the youngest players in this draft class, and easily the top defenseman in this class for me. You can see what he's been able to do with Erie, what he was able to do with his two games of the World Juniors. He was prolific. They're using his skating, the confidence, the offensive brain. It's all at a high level. And let's be honest, too, with some of those specialty tournaments like the World Juniors, like the NCDP, CHL Top Prospect games, those are where most of these scouts are going to be seeing players like Schaefer the most as well, and he was brilliant in those games. Spectacular, and I think that's why he's made such a strong impression. I'm kind of surprised to see so many people having Schaefer way above the rest of the class. I thought James Hagens was brilliant at the World Juniors as well. In a play like Michael Misa's case, I think you can make the argument he's been the best player in the entirety of the CHL this year. I still think it's extremely close, but it's interesting to see the gap widening. That leads us on to the rest of the rankings here, and let's get into the rest of the top 5. Of course, you got Schaefer at #1, then it goes James Hagens, Michael Misa, Porter Martone, and Anton Frendel. This is where things get weird to me because you have James Hagens at #2, which is fine. I could totally respect that opinion, but they go for the reasoning here. And as Bob McKenzie says, he played well for Team USA. I think did have a slow start for BC, getting accustomed to the pace of the NCAA. But they talk about why, and they say that Hagens is not quite 6 feet tall, which is probably why the scouts are projecting him as more of a second-line center than a first-liner in the NHL. He's a smart and skilled player, probably a better playmaker than goal scorer, but he certainly has the ability to finish. Why is the big reason why James Hagens can't be a first-line center that he's not 6 feet? Somebody's got to tell Sid the Kid that because he's not 6 foot, he'll never be a first-line center. I'm sure that conversation will go real well. But even the player that I think he stylistically fits the most with, a player like Jack Hughes, is 5'11", and even though he had some growing pains in the NHL to start things out, he hasn't really been too bad the last couple, and when he has played, he's been extremely impactful. I don't think James Hagens is going to have any problem whatsoever. We saw some issues with him starting out the year, but I think especially at the World Juniors, you saw more of a defensive, more of a physical element to him. I don't think that'll ever be his bread and butter, but I think you could make the case he's a more well-rounded player than Jack Hughes was at the same age. Maybe not as impactful or as impressively skilled, but in Hagens' case, the playmaking, the pace is all there to me to fit as a first-line center in the NHL. Maybe not a franchise generationally changing guy, but still somebody that is very impactful. And to knock him because he's not 6 feet is just asinine. This isn't 1974. The league is different. And that's the only thing they knock Hagens for in this article, which I find insane because there is things I think you can knock him against if you were to have him outside your first place spot. I think you maybe want a little bit more intensity with him sometimes. There can be some inconsistencies there. And I think there are times maybe where you want more consistency with his goal scoring, with his shooting ability. That's something that I think can be all over the place sometimes. I can see that. If you were to have that type of issue, especially compared to all these elite prospects inside the top 4, I can see that. But the size, are you kidding me, dude? I was gonna say things can't really get much weirder than this, but they get weirder than this because what they talk about with Michael Misa is even more strange. Now, they mentioned 7 over 10 panel slotted Hagens at number 2, and of course, Michael Misa comes at number 3, vaulting from number 7 to number 3. One scout ranked Misa 2nd overall, and 5 others had him at number 3. But then this part here is so strange because Bob McKenzie writes, some scouts wonder if he'll be a better NHL winger than a center, but he's expected to make his mark offensively in either spot. No, I think he would still be a good winger, but Michael Misa is such a projectable center in every single way because a lot of his offense is fed through his brain, fed through his defensive play, and the effort all around the ice. His 200-foot game, I think, is the best out of the top 4 in this class by far, and I think that projects him so easily as a top 6 centerman who will just have so much because of the responsibility that he has all around the ice. To put that on the wing, I think would just be a mistake. Even though on the wing, I think he could have some great offensive moments. The goal scoring, I think, would really shine. Why would you fix what's not broken? He has been unbelievable this year with Saginaw, and there's no reason to change anything that he's doing right now. Now, their part on Porter Martone at 4th overall, I think, is a lot more consistent, I would say, talking about his ability to drive the net, his shooting ability, and his ability to just be a force all over the ice, saying how his skating is more good than great, which I think is the biggest weakness with him. His speed and his, I think, acceleration speed, especially in his separation ability, can be a little bit of a problem, I think, going to the later levels, but I think he'll be just fine. He'll be a fantastic player, and somebody that at 4th, most likely ending up in that range, would be a fantastic pick no matter what. Now, one of the interesting parts about this top 5 was Anton Frindell still finding himself at 5th overall. He was 3rd in the preseason rankings and only drops a couple of spots, which I found surprising because he's dropped a lot more for me. Now, one of the scouts said he's a strong, detail-oriented 200-foot center, and I would absolutely agree with that. Though, I think Frindell is just a hard player to really judge this year. He was fantastic last season, and I was super high on him, but this year it feels like a lot less confidence is there, a lot more less consistency, I think, is there every single shift, at least in the Ihs-Vozniak scan. I think he's kind of lost his way a little bit. I still think there's a lot of skill there, but you're definitely betting on him being more of the player he was last year than this year. Now on to the rest of the top 10, and a little bit less surprising, but still some interesting ones. Caleb Denoyer is the big one, rising from a lot of spots here to find himself at 6th overall. I like Denoyer quite a bit as this skilled overall centerman, but 6th overall was pretty interesting. You got Roger McQueen at 7. I was expecting him to drop a little bit more, but considering the size and skill blend, I'm not really all that surprised. Victor Eklund, it pains me to see him still this low at number 8, but I'll take whatever I can get. Not many people I would expect would have a player that high. You got Jake O'Brien at number 9, of somebody that's really been torching the OHL the last few weeks, and Jackson Smith rounding it out as the 2nd defenseman ranked on the list. Now, the part on Denoyer I thought was interesting. The Wildcat is viewed as perhaps the most complete two-way center in the draft, who projects in the NHL as a second-line center or, worst-case scenario, an elite third-line shutdown center. Think a Phil Deneau style player. Now, this is kind of a nitpick from my perspective, but the most complete two-way center, especially when you have a player like Michael Misa, who I think is a lot more dynamic offensively, is a little bit of a nitpick of mine. But I do think Denoyer might be one of the more balanced centermen of this class. I can absolutely say that. And as they say with the rankings, Denoyer was ranked as high as number 5 by one scout and no lower than number 10. He's viewed as a safe and secure pick, and if you believe his offense will pop at the pro level, he's a top 5 consideration. And I could absolutely see that. I think Denoyer will just be a very solid all-around middle 6C and somebody that you can depend upon. He won't be a bad pick, but won't be somebody that absolutely blows you away. Now, the part of McQueen was very interesting because, of course, he hasn't played in a long time, basically since October, and he hasn't played most of this season, especially for a player that was as raw as McQueen. I think losing this development year almost entirely is going to be really rough for him. It's interesting that Bob McKenzie knows that some scouts are ranking him now as if he's a healthy player, which I don't really understand why. He's not a healthy player, so why are you ranking him as such? But it's interesting in his number 7th ranking, down one spot from the preseason, has a gigantic asterisk to it. We have him at 5 right now, but it's really just a placeholder until we get some clarity on his health. And another scout said, if the draft was being held tomorrow, he would be a no draft for us. And instead, another scout who also ranked him 5th overall in his talent and potential when healthy, without a lot more information and seeing all medical reports, we're just not comfortable taking that chance. And that is interesting because, as Bob McKenzie mentions, it is potentially a lower back ailment, which, again, for a player like that who's on the bigger side of things, who really needs to lunge over to get into the play and make his impact, that could be a really tough one to come back from. We are quite literally seeing Caden Lindstrom, who is a pretty similar player, I would say, in some respects, having, of course, the back issues he's having and really feeling the pain of that. Now, touching on the rest of the list and some of the surprises I saw, I did want to give shoutouts to Lakovic and Carter Bear, 2 guys you know in the WHL that I absolutely love. I don't really understand Brady Martin, of all people, being above them, but in Lakovic's case, I love the skill, I love the determination. In Bear's case, he is just such a dog out there. I'm kind of surprised to see him as high as 15, considering he's such a physical player that isn't all that big, and that's something that scouts seem to always be questioning about, but I think at 15, that's some place where, honestly, if you get him at 15 overall, you'll be a happy man. Another one I was surprised to see was Ivan Ryabkin, and not that he's dropped so much going from 5th to 19th overall, that was expected. I'm honestly kind of surprised he didn't even drop more, because I could see, if you're going on just how they played this year, I don't think Ryabkin is even close to a top 2 round guy for me this season. He is somebody that is just completely dropped off in every single way, but it seems like they still have some belief in him. Now, they do touch on him in this article, talking about the hype before the season, try to follow in the footsteps of Michkov and Ivan Demidov, though that absolutely will not be happening. It's interesting because they talk about the scouts' perception. Scouts are still hopeful he'll reestablish his game and move up the ladder into top 10 contention, but if he fails to get traction in the USHL, he could slip and slide some more. 8 of the 10 scouts on the TSN panel still ranked him as a first rounder, as high as 11th overall, but there was a wide variance amongst them, including 2 scouts that had him well into the 2nd round. And I think those 2 scouts, at least of what we're seeing this year, are being a little bit more real, a little bit more factual than some of the others. I think, especially what we've seen out of the USHL, it is a slow start, new league, I do get that, but he hasn't really changed my mind on his slipping in my rankings, his falling off, because he just kind of seems like the same player. The same undisciplinedness, which of course got him a 3-game suspension already. He just is such a frustrating player to watch, that is somebody that is quickly becoming a no draft for me at all. He's somebody that I would just look at other options, just because I think there's just more interest there and more projectability. Now, somebody that's in a similar position to me as Carter Bear at 15th overall, somebody I was surprised to see this high, is Cullen Potter out of Arizona State. You can see him at 20th overall, which was a little bit of a surprise. I thought he'd be more in the late 1st round range to me, but he's somebody that has worked his way into my top 15, and I think is somebody that will be working his way into a lot of top 15 soon. With how well he's been playing for Arizona State, the pace, the skill set, the intensity with the puck, he's just so much fun to watch out there. And if you're looking for somebody that's like Hagens but isn't in the NCAA this year, Potter is right there as this speedy guy that just brings so much to the table on offense, and with Arizona State this year is really starting to get going these last few weeks. One I was disappointed to see in the 2nd round was Cameron Reed out of the Kitchener Rangers. He's something that I've liked a lot this draft year. He's kind of just like a Matthew Schaefer light to me, where there is so much up the ice in terms of transition play and confidence that just oozes offensive skill. And to me, he's somebody that does have some question marks with his positioning defensively and how he plays against the rush, but man, there is just so much to like there. And even though I think he's better than a 2nd rounder, I can see some of the defensive issues being a little bit of a question mark for people, but dang it, Reed should be higher next time around, and I will stick by that. Somebody I was really surprised to see in not just the 2nd round, but pretty late in the 2nd round, was Shane Van Sacke out of Michigan State. He's somebody that I've really liked watching this year, is obviously, of course, having his rookie season in the NCAA, but is already playing a pretty pivotal role in the depth for a Michigan State team that is absolutely loaded. His points aren't too bad either, 12 points in 24 games, but like I talked about in my rankings, I don't think that's what you're really going to be getting out of Van Sacke in the future. This is just a dog in so many ways. Physically, along the boards, he is a monster in stripping pucks and creating chaos. I don't think there is a more versatile physical forward in this draft class, and I'm really surprised with all the projectable traits he has that he'd find himself in the 2nd round, but I think some team is going to get a really projectable, really solid, really consistent middle sixer out of it. One player I was disappointed to see in just the honorable mention tier was Arvid Drott coming out of Sweden. He's somebody that I think just has such a good balance with a power forward edge while bringing some great speed and intensity. He's somebody that I would absolutely have at least in the 2nd round. Outside the top 80, I think is a little bit disrespectful. One that isn't as much of a surprise to see outside the top 80 is John aka LJ Mooney, and I've gotten a lot of questions on him about why I haven't had him in the top end of this draft class for in my rankings for really a while now, and that's just because I'm not really a believer. I'm sorry. For me, the bar for a player that is 5'6", 146 pounds is extraordinarily high to have inside of my top 2 rounds, especially to see as a future NHLer. To me with Mooney, I just don't see that. He isn't quite the elite processor or the elite speedster that I need him to be to, I think, even have a shot at the NHL level. There's some good skill there, especially with the playmaking that he does provide and the vision there. There's a lot of great fun moments, but in terms of actually translating it, I just don't think it's going to happen. Trust me, he'll be a beast in college and absolutely feast, I think, in the AHL someday perhaps, but in terms of being an NHLer and an impact guy against big physical competition, I think it's going to be a learning curve at the best, and I think a total failure at the worst. I think it's maybe like a 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th rounder. I could kind of see that, but an honorable mention, I think that makes sense. Now, the last thing I want to mention in this article was actually a bunch of these scouts talking about the depth of this draft class, and it's something that I absolutely agree with. We talked about that in a video a couple months back about my concerns for this draft, and especially after that top group of guys, a little bit of a fall off in the quality of this class. And as they go through it, they kind of have the same sentiment. They say, like pretty much every year, the scouts are enamored with the 2025 crop of talent available in the top 10, actually make that top 15. Beyond that, though, the consensus seems to be that the class of 2025 lacks depth of talent. As good as the top guys are this year, one scout said, I'd be surprised if anyone from this draft class plays in the NHL next season. I would be really surprised. I would be really surprised if somebody didn't, honestly. At least if a player like Michael Misa were to get first overall, I think he absolutely makes the jump, but that's just me. They go on to say number 1 to 8 are quite strong, but there's a bit of a drop off after 8 and then a bigger drop off after 15 to 20. One scout went so far as to say a lot of the players will be drafted in the bottom half of the first round and would in prior years be better suited to being second round picks. And honestly, I do agree with this. Even though I disagree with some of these guys like Fiddler, Coots, Potter, I think those guys are absolutely first rounders in other seasons. You look at some of the other guys in the second half of the first, guys like Cameron Schmidt. I mean, a player like Joshua Ravensburg. I mean, I think he's fine as a goaltending prospect, but as a first rounder, I think that just shows the lack of depth in this class. And I think that is the biggest thing that's going to kind of permeate throughout this class over the years. I think the top 4 is absolutely brilliant. I think all 4 of those guys have potential to be first overall type of players. But outside of that, you got a couple guys I really like Jackson Smith, Victor Eklund. And then outside of that, I think there is a humongous difference. It's a clear drop off. And I think that is something that will potentially go into trades that we see and could factor in on draft day towards different moves. Because I think there's going to be a lot of teams outside that top 8, top 10 that will want to move into the top class, or else they might not even get a prospect worth talking about. But a lot of very interesting stuff with this Bob McKenzie ranking, and I want to know down below your thoughts on the top end of the rankings, what you guys agree, what you guys disagreed with, and how closely does it align to your personal rankings? Do you also agree with Matthew Schaefer being first overall? Do you agree with the top 4 ranking of Schaefer, Hagens, Misa, and Martone? Let me know all your thoughts down below, and of course, make sure you share the video with all the hockey fans you guys know online. Click that like button, click that subscribe button, and that notification bell if you haven't already, and click on this card for all my hockey prospect talk right in one playlist. A big thank you to the Bob Father for releasing another great ranking. And of course, thank you guys for watching today. And I will see you guys in the next one. Have a fantastic hockey day and goodbye.